just now recalled something that I was originally called to mention in the announcements, which is the food item for this week. Food item for this week would be canned meats. I completely forgot about mentioning the food item last Sunday morning, but thankfully the sisters and those who were in attendance Wednesday night came to an agreement that maybe canned meat. So any canned meat would be a great item to bring for this week. Canned meat. Now, it's funny how I mentioned the fact that I recalled because originally Brother Sid had called me to announce a food item every week during the announcements. Well, simply forgot last week and I forgot this morning, and so instead of trying to say as a way of a reminder, I'd say that, hey, I recalled something that I was originally called to announce for the announcements, the food item for the week. I always find that word recalled very interesting because when we look at it in the definition of our English dictionary, recall does not necessarily or only mean to remember. It actually has other meanings behind it, and we use it in many different ways. For example, when a car is defective, it may be recalled. Or think of it like this. When an elected official betrays the public trust, he may be recalled and voted out of office. Sometimes we kind of use that word impeachment. But technically, in political aspects, that is what it means when we say that an elected official is recalled. In other words, people are recalling for his impeachment to be out of office. And so we use that word in a very peculiar and interesting, different amount of ways. But when I look at John chapter 21, when we study the Gospel of John, and when you get to the very last chapter of his beautiful laid out gospel account, Peter himself was recalled. He was recalled by the Lord to his original calling. He had been sidetracked, but the Lord Jesus helped him get back on the main track. Often, we too need to be challenged to take up again the task that Jesus gave us to do when we became his disciples. Sometimes, we need to be recalled to discipleship. Like Peter, sometimes we too need to be recalled to discipleship. Now, this lesson is designed to show that discipleship demands clear priorities, commitment, and willingness to pay the price. It also issues a personal challenge to get back on track and to follow Jesus as a faithful disciple. Not just to follow him some way, but to follow him all the way. Peter needed to be recalled to get back on track to his main task. There are things that we can learn from Peter's experience that's recorded for us in the Gospel of John chapter 21. His experience which may help us as well to get back on track. Because sometimes we too get sidetracked and we forget our main task. When we begin in John chapter 21, look at the first 3 verses. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. John begins in this final chapter of his gospel account by noting from the first 3 verses that we find the reason for Peter's recall. The reason for Peter's recall. Why did Peter say, I am going fishing? Why did he say that? Fishing almost certainly did not mean the same thing to Peter that it would mean for us. When we say that I'm going fishing, we may do it for recreational purposes. Maybe for some R&R, rest and relaxation, for recuperation, revitalization, to revive us physically. It is something that we often do as a hobby. Sometimes we may even go fishing for food. It is unlikely that Peter was fishing for fun or for recreational purposes, as you may want to put it. He was, after all, a fisherman by trade. He told the other apostles who were there, 6 others, excluding Peter, so 7 total. When he said, I'm going fishing, he almost certainly was planning to fish for profit. And he was leading others to do the same. Notice that only 4 of the apostles, as far as we know, originally were fishermen. At this time, we now have a total of 7. So if the original 4 fishermen were fishing again, then that means that they converted 3 others with them. That's to say, with the assumption that the other 3 were not fishermen by trade. But Peter, I would say, that is an individual who was probably pretty good salesman for the Fishermen's Union, wouldn't you say? But what was wrong with that? Why was this the reason for Peter's being recalled by the Lord? The problem was that Peter and the others had abandoned, temporarily at least, the quest to which Jesus called them to do. He had called them to be fishers of men. They had left their fishing nets to follow him. John chapter 1, verse 41 and 42 implies that, as well as you can cross-reference Matthew chapter 4, verse 18 through 20. Jesus had tried to explain to them how important it was that they go and bear much fruit. Chapter 15, verse 8 of John. He had tried to explain that many would believe on him through their word. Chapter 17, verse 20 of John. So again, this is like 3 years after spending time with Jesus. These were the things that Jesus has taught and explained to them for 3 years. And now, after appearing post-resurrection twice to the apostles, they still didn't get it. They still decided to go back to their old trading post. They left fishing for men and gone back to their nets. Jesus had called Peter from fishing with nets, but now Peter has gone back to fishing with nets. Evidently, their mission at this time was not yet clear to them, nor were they fully committed to it just yet. So Jesus had already been raised from the dead and had already appeared to the apostles twice. Go back to chapter 20 and read verse 19 and 26. Verse 19 is his first time appearing to them, and then verse 26 would be the second time appearing to them. So here in chapter 21, this would be the 3rd time that Jesus had to appear to them after his resurrection. And we see that in verse 14 of the chapter. So without question, they were slow to believe. Even if they did believe, they did not fully understand the significance of the resurrection. You can go back to chapter 16, verse 30 and 32. I'll read that real quickly. Chapter 16, verse 30 and 32. Here's what it says. Now we know that you know all things. These are the apostles speaking. Now we know that you know all things and do not need anyone to question you. This is why we believe that you came from God. Jesus answered them, do you now believe? Behold, the hour is coming. Indeed, it has come, when you will be scattered, each to his own home, and you will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me. So even at that time, Jesus already knew, that they still had not fully believed and understand the significance of what's about to take place and what had already taken place. So without a doubt, unbelief for the apostles to have seen the resurrected Jesus without understanding that this meant that their calling was still in effect. So Peter and the apostles, they needed to be recalled to the task to which Jesus had originally called them. So why is this so important for us today? Well, for many reasons. We need to ask ourselves whether we too may have abandoned or turned from the major task to which Jesus has called us. Have we too, figuratively speaking, gone back to our fishing nets? Have we gone back and forgotten the task to which Jesus had originally called us? This task that he gave the apostles is the same task for us: to fish for men, to seek and save the lost. Luke chapter 19, verse 10. The task is to abide in him and to bear much fruit. Chapter 15, verse 1 through 11 of John. To proclaim the excellencies of him who has called us out of darkness and into his marvelous light. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. But yet how easy it is for us to neglect this task. Individual Christians may become so involved in their work or recreation that they have no time left to help save souls. Church leaders may easily become so involved in trivial details that the sheep go unsought and the lambs are lost. Don't you think that this doesn't apply to me as a preacher? Because it definitely applies to preachers as well. Because preachers may become so involved in promotional, organizational, and administrative details that they have no time to spend actually preaching to the lost. Even congregations as a whole may even lose their sense of calling. Sometimes they get so busy just keeping the congregational machinery oiled that they forget that God called them as a church to bring the lost to Christ. When we lose our direction, we need what Peter needed. And that is to be recalled to our original calling that the Lord once called us to do. So that is the reason from what we see in the first 3 verses, as the opening of chapter 21 that we see as to why. Why did Peter need to be recalled? Well, because he went back to his old ways, his old way of living, and he neglected the call to which Jesus had originally called him to do. So when he recalled Peter, what were some requirements that needed to be done? What were some requirements or necessities that Peter needed to have in order for him to get back on track? Well, as we look at point number 2, we see from verse 4, really through the end of, almost the end of the chapter, at least to verse 22, we see the requirements of Peter's call. We begin verse 4. Let's go ahead and kind of break it down a little bit. Verse 4 through 13. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." That sounds a little familiar. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." The disciple whom he loved, John, the apostle. He recalled. He remembered that time. And he said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got on the land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there are so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and eat." Some versions may say, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. From what we see here, the first requirement of what Peter needed in order to help him get back on track was the need for deeper faith. First requirement was the need for a deeper faith. This appearance would have impressed the apostles. It impressed them first with Jesus' deity. The emphasis here is on the fact that Jesus, who was raised from the dead, is the same Jesus the apostles had been with for 3 years. They would have been reminded about the time when Jesus fed the 5,000 by multiplying the loaves and fishes, for it was at the same location. Look at verse 1, back at verse 1. They were at the Sea of Tiberias. When you go back to chapter 6, verse 1 through 14, guess where Jesus fed the 5,000 at? On the shore near the Sea of Tiberias, same location. But more importantly, the main occasion of remembrance would have been when they were first originally called, for it was the same miracle. Luke chapter 5, verse 1 through 11. When Jesus had first called them to come follow him, when he had first called them to discipleship, they were fishing in a boat. And he told them the same thing, "Cast your net." And they did. And the net was filled with fishes. And so here again, they needed some assurance. They needed a deeper faith. And so seeing that that they didn't have any fish, they didn't catch any the night before, Jesus said, "Okay, well, cast it on the right." And immediately it was filled with fish, 153 of them. It was then they recognized that this man was the Lord Jesus, the same man that they spent time for the last 3 years following. Upon reaching the shore, they observed a charcoal fire with the smell of cooked fish and fresh bread. And Jesus says, "Come and eat." The risen Lord invited them, and they did. They sat and they ate with the risen Lord, the same man that they had spent the last 3 years with. Now, this invitation would have also recalled to them the other invitations that Jesus extended in his gospel ministry. John, in his gospel account, records 3 invitations. So now we have 3 appearances, 3 invitations. Jesus first told them to come and see. John chapter 1, verse 39. Then when you get to chapter 7, verse 37, he says, "Come and drink." And now in chapter 21, he says, "Come and eat." In addition, the apostles would have been impressed again with the goodness and the love and the care and concern of Jesus, because even though it is probable that he did not approve of their going fishing, he was concerned that they had caught nothing and helped them catch a boat full of fish, as well as having breakfast ready for them. These men were the ones who had recently forsaken the Lord Jesus and denied him, who had abandoned the task to which God had called them. But when Jesus came to them, he came not with harsh words, but with care, love, and concern, with kind words, and with food to meet their needs. So first, what Peter, and I will also say that the rest of the apostles who were with them, one of the requirements they needed was a deeper faith. But then, it doesn't stop there. We also see that Peter needed greater love. That was another requirement that he needed. A need for greater love, a challenge to greater love. When we continue on, verse 15, When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Jesus asked Peter a very profound and prominent question. Do you love me? Why did Jesus single Peter out from the other apostles? After all, when you think about it, if Peter had abandoned his calling, so had the other apostles. So why did he just single Peter out? Well, for one thing, Peter was a leader. Earlier, he had led in fishing for men, but now he was leading in fishing for fish. If he could be converted or changed, he could again lead the other apostles to do what the Lord had originally called them to do. Luke tells us in his gospel account that Jesus said to Peter that he would have to be converted, and in doing so, he would then be able to strengthen his brethren. Luke chapter 22, verse 31 and 32. This reading here in John 21, 15 through 17, is the record of Peter's conversion. Peter is changed, converted by this experience. The other apostles follow him back to their ministry. So that's one thing, is that Peter was a leader. For another thing, the main purpose of Jesus' questions may not have been so much to reproach Peter as to give Peter a chance to get the stain off of his conscience, to help him overcome the guilt feelings which he may have contributed in his abandonment of Jesus, for his denying him 3 times. Several things on this occasion must have reminded Peter of his denials, because Jesus was preparing food at a fire. Peter's thoughts when he saw that charcoal fire may have reflected back on that occasion when he warmed himself by the fire, which is where he denied Jesus both times, the last 2 times. Chapter 18, verse 17 and 18, and verse 25 of John. But especially with the 3 questions about Jesus' love here, reminded Peter of that other occasion where he denied him 3 times. If you hadn't noticed, there are a number of 3s all throughout this text. In Jewish numerology, the number 3 represented the number for God. 3 appearances were mentioned. Verse 14 and back in chapter 20, verse 19 and 26. 3 invitations were given. Peter's 3 denials. His 3 questions about love. 3 confessions of love. 3 commandments made by Jesus. There were 3 resurrection appearances recorded. That is enough to prove conclusively that Jesus is alive again. There were 3 denials. That is enough. It was not just a momentary weakness. When Peter denied Jesus, it happened 3 times. Peter thoroughly, completely denied Jesus. Then there were 3 confessions of love, 1 for each denial. Peter must thoroughly confess, just as he thoroughly denied. If Peter could confess his love 1 time for each time he denied the Lord, he could again carry on the work of the Lord. But notice that Jesus did not stop there. Not only did he stop with, "Do you love me?" but he goes on to say, "Do you love me more than these?" Do you love me more than these? Literally, in the Greek text, it'd be translated "these things." Well, what things? The things that were around Peter. The fishing, the nets, the boats. In other words, do you love me more than fishing? Fishing for fish, that is. If you do, Then what are you doing here, Peter? Why have you gone back to your old task? It's not what I called you to do. Get busy in the soul business and get out of the fish business. And what was Peter's reply to each question? Lord, you know that I love you. Now here's where it gets sad, folks. The first and second time that Jesus asked the question, do you love me? He used the Greek word agape, which is the strongest, highest form of love. Self-sacrificial love. A love that gets self out of the way and puts another before. But when Peter answers him, he uses the Greek word phileo. The Greek word phileo is not the highest form of love. Rather, it's more of an affection that one may have towards a friend. Like, I like you as a friend type of love. That's it. So the two questions and answers, therefore, can be read like this. Simon, do you love me with the highest self-sacrificial love? Lord, you know that I like you as a friend. Simon, do you love me with the highest self-sacrificial love? Lord, you know that I like you as a friend. When Jesus questioned Peter the third time, he uses the word phileo. He changed the form of his question and used Peter's word phileo, as in the sense of asking, are you sure that you're even my friend? Are you sure about that? By this time, I'm quite sure that Peter was getting the picture, because after Jesus asked him that third time, Peter was grieved. He was grieved because he knew that Jesus said, do you even phileo me? Are you even my friend? I'm sure that without a doubt, Peter started to recall the teaching back in chapter 15, verse 13 of John, where Jesus says, greater love is this, that a man laid down his life for his friends. By changing from agape to phileo, Jesus did that for a reason. It is as if he's implying to Peter, you say that you are my friend, but you did not even lay down your life for me. If you want to be my friend, phileo is not enough. You must have a greater love, agape. This greater love is what will assist Peter in the task of doing the work that the Lord had originally called him to do. Feed my sheep. The Lord's sheep are those who believe and trust in him, John chapter 10. In essence, the Lord is commanding Peter to get busy in helping others. If you love me, help others. If you love me, keep my commandments. And what is my commandment to you? Feed my sheep. Help others. Seek souls. Bring more sheep and lamb to my fold. Forget yourself and put others before you. This was a valuable requirement and lesson for Peter, because we can rejoice in knowing that eventually Peter did learn this beautiful lesson. And he encourages all Christians to follow that same lesson. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 7. Peter says, from your phileo, brotherly love, friendly love, add to it agape love. Peter learned that lesson. We can rejoice in knowing that. And he urges and encourages us all to do the same. Don't stop with phileo. It's not enough just to have an affection for Jesus, but you ought to have a love that's going to be willing to lay down your life for him if you're called to do so. He passed on that same lesson for us. We need a greater love. But then also, the last requirement that we see that Peter needed was a personal commitment to discipleship. Verse 18 through 22. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, You used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. This is said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following him, the one who had been reclining at the table close to him and had said, "Lord, who is it that is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, the disciple whom he loved, John, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about this man?" Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me!" Exclamation point. What's that old saying? Don't put a period where God put an exclamation mark, or don't put a question mark where God put an exclamation mark. You follow me. Jesus challenged Peter to get back to the work to which he had originally called by saying, "You follow me." In John chapter 1, verse 37 through 43, Jesus called the apostles by saying, "Follow me." Here at the end of the book, he concluded his ministry with that same calling. Follow me. It's a recall. A total recall is what it is. This explains why the doubting disciples of earlier days became the dynamic apostles of later days, and explains why and how the church grew until John's day. It was simply because the apostles at last accepted Jesus' challenge and his call, "Follow me." How far was Peter to follow? Well, Jesus says, all the way until your hands are stretched out. Jesus warned Peter about what following would mean. It would mean Peter's death. To follow is not just to have a nice little life, being good to others and having no worries. Rather, it means death. Revelation 2:10, "Be thou faithful unto death." Some versions may translate "until death." Well, both ways you translate it, it means the same thing. We are to be faithful until death. In other words, meaning that, okay, well, we may live a long, prosperous life and we may die peacefully of old age, but we are faithful until death. Yes, we need that. But it's also unto death. Meaning that even if death calls us, even if our life is put on that line and someone is trying to kill us, because we won't renounce Christ and we won't renounce him as Lord and Master of our life, even if death is at the door right there, and you have to lay down your life for Jesus. If it comes to the point, I can't explain this even more simple. Even if, I see some grammar Nazis out there laughing and smiling, I know. Good thing I'm in good old Arkansas, yeah. But even if you have to choose, saying that either your life, renounce Jesus and live, or keep Jesus as Lord and die. Jesus is saying, you better take the second option. Even if it calls laying down your life, you are to be faithful. This became very clear to Peter that Jesus was referring to his death, because your hands, he says, will be stretched out. And historically speaking, guess how Peter died? Crucifixion, upside down. Peter knew that by the time he was writing his second letter, that his time was coming. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 13 and 14. He knew that his time of departure, where he was going to have to stretch out his hands, was right around the corner. Peter tried to turn attention from himself by asking about John. What about this man? If I'm going to die because of following you, what is going to happen to him? In response, Jesus told Peter to follow and never mind about others. Don't worry about what is going on or what is going to happen to John or anyone else. Just make sure that you follow me. Peter needed to stop comparing himself with others and start making his own personal commitment to follow Jesus all the way. And folks, from this, as I mentioned, is a great lesson for us, because we find so many reminders for our recall. And there's 3 specific reminders at hand. Reminder number 1 is that Jesus is now what he was then. He's still the divine Son of God who commands us to preach the gospel to every creature, Mark 16:15. And we can learn that Jesus still deserves to be loved because he loves us. He dealt lovingly with the apostles when the apostles failed him. Peter had denied him 3 times. But Jesus still loved him and gave him a chance to confess his love for Jesus. Even when we disappoint Jesus, we can be sure that he still loves us and will always welcome us back with open arms. He's still the same as he was then, and he will remain as he has always been. Another requirement or reminder that we see is the challenge to have greater love. Just as Peter needed to have greater love, we too need to have greater love. Jesus still asks to be loved, John 14:15. If you love me, keep my commandments. I'm persuaded that John, when he recorded this incident, wanted each reader to apply the questions from verse 15 through 17 to him or herself. Jesus asks you, do you love me? But Jesus asks more than that. He's asking you, do you love me more than these things? Jesus wants first place, not just any old place. He wants first place in our lives. Do you love me more than these? More than what? You fill in the blank. More than anything which is at present keeping you from the task to which he has called you. More than your work? More than your opinion? More than your politics? Believe it or not, this is a great exercise to do for you and you alone. I went ahead and practiced this to myself. Let me share with you some of the questions that I had to ask. Do I love him more than wrestling? Do I love him more than the gym? Do I love him more than my friends? Do I love him more than my own wife and son? Do I love him more than self? Jesus responds to us as he did Peter. He says in effect, think of others. Feed my sheep. Tend my lambs. If you love me, says Jesus, help people. Get busy doing the work that I gave you to do. Get back into the business of souls. If we have been involved in other religious activities, but we have neglected the task of seeking the lost, Jesus asks us, do you love me more than these? Get back to the work that I gave you to do and follow me all the way, even if it means your death. And that is that third reminder. A personal commitment to discipleship, to follow Jesus all the way. Sometimes we are too concerned about others, just as Peter was concerned about John. When he tried to turn the attention over to John and say, well, what about him? If I have to die, what about him? What does Jesus say? Don't worry about him. You follow me. And often we do the same thing as Peter does, do we not? Sometimes we get too concerned about others. One person says, I'm not going to worship because so-and-so hurt my feelings. Another might say, I've stopped going to service because the church did not do enough to help my family members. Not that they didn't do anything, but that they did not do enough for my family. And so I'm just going to stop coming. Someone else might say, I'm not going to do the work of saving souls. I'm already doing more than anyone else in the church. Sometimes we might even say, I'm not going to do the work of saving souls. I've worked hard my whole life, and now I'm so-and-so years old, and I did my fare of hard work and of doing what I'm supposed to do to make a living. But now I just want to kind of finish the remainder of my life with just rest, relaxation, and with no responsibility. Let somebody else do it. Well, Jesus responds, never mind about others. Do what you have been called to do. You follow me. Do not let anyone keep you from doing the Lord's will. Do not wait on someone else to respond. You follow Jesus today. Go ahead and sing with me, folks. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. Though none go with me, I still will follow. Though none go with me, I still will follow. Though none go with me, I still will follow. No turning back, no turning back. Sometimes, like Peter, we lose our way in the maze of trivia and forget that which is most important. And that is serving the Lord and doing what he has called us to do. We need to be challenged, like Peter, to a deeper faith, a greater love, and a personal commitment to discipleship. Jesus, who called us to become Christians, recalls us to our calling. The question is, how will you respond? How will I respond? If we can help you in any way, please come forward together as we stand and as we sing.
There's a fountain free, it's for you and me.